Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. Well, welcome to another episode of Say Hi to the Future. Excited about today. Today we've got Marques Redd with us. He's the co-founder of Rainbow Serpent, a nonprofit that seeks to advance Black LGBTQ culture through the exploration of emerging technologies, advanced healing protocols, multimedia art, and traditional African cosmologies. And I am somebody who loves to learn, love to go down rabbit holes. So when I read traditional African cosmologies, it's something that I really, truly wasn't, aware of or understood. So I did a little Googling. I'm going to read this, and then Marques, it's up to you from there. So what I read about it is it's the way Africans perceive, conceive, and contemplate their universe, the lens through which they see reality, which affects their value system. So, Marques, once again, welcome and take us through African cosmologies.
Perfect. First, let me start by saying thank you for this invitation. I am honored to be here and happy to have this conversation. So yes, as you said, Ken, I'm the co-founder along with Michaela Wuna of Rainbow Serpent, and engaging with African cosmologies is really central to what we do. So just to explain a little bit about what that means, we could think about, let's say, broad strokes, the difference between, let's say, traditional African approaches to knowledge and maybe more Western concepts and modes of knowledge that we might be used to. I mean, one interesting distinction that might help us really hone in on the issue here is we could say that Western knowledge predominantly tends to be about hyperspecialization, learning how to break things into smaller and smaller pieces, learning how to focus and drill in and kind of take objects down into their constituent parts. So you learn kind of more and more about smaller and smaller domains. Where I think traditional African knowledge systems work in the reverse. And I see them really as a holistic attempt to fuse all of the disciplines, to fuse art, religion, and science. It's a knowledge project that's not about studying the world as an external object, but about using potent combinations of rituals and symbols to embed communities more into the natural world, with the goal of expanding consciousness and more radically transforming humans into divine beings.
So how does that travel, if you will? Because what you're describing to me, and just for context, I'm a Canadian. Not all that different from Americans in the Northeast because I'm up in Toronto, but we won't admit that. But how does that travel from Africa to the US? Because the notion, and I'd love you to talk more about it, of divine beings and what you describe, it doesn't reflect to me of what I think of as say traditional North American culture or awareness levels.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, and really, I would say these systems have been following people of the African diaspora since the original migrations out of the continent. I mean, particularly in our more current situation, I mean, we could think about all of the travel of African people that happened as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, where we had people, communities that were displaced into the Caribbean, into countries like Brazil, into America. And their belief systems, their approaches to the world, their thoughts about the universe traveled in part with them. In certain cases, let's say in the Brazil situation, I mean, you have systems like candomblé, where those traditions are very strong and have really maintained certain forms of continuity over the past few centuries. In Cuba, traditions like Santeria, where traditional Yoruba-based practices were fused with Catholicism to create a new blend. And so you can find traces of those traditions all throughout the New World. But I would say Rainbow Serpent's project, more specifically, is about how to revive traditions, how to modernize them, and how to extend them, and particularly thinking about queer African spiritual traditions and cosmologies.
What are those actually? You just mentioned queer African cosmologies. What are some of those traditions that you speak to?
Yes, so I would talk about this concept of the gatekeepers, which was popularized by Malidoma Somé, who was a spiritualist who came from Burkina Faso. And he made an argument that in his particular traditional context, the creator was imagined as androgynous, this fusion of masculine and feminine, and more intensely that the world itself emanates from this primordial androgynous blackness. And because LGBTQ people can vibrate this masculine and feminine energy, we were thought in that context to have a unique connection to the creator, and were therefore tasked with guarding these gates between the physical and spiritual worlds by serving as the healers, the diviners, the shamans. And there was a very strong idea about queerness itself having a spiritual function and a role to play in maintaining cultural continuity and the connectedness of the people and generations in that society. And you can find these kinds of ideas about the androgynous creator, these queer people who are these intermediary spiritual figures in many different cultural contexts throughout the continent. And this is why we built a project called Myth Science of the Gatekeepers, which just recently opened about 2 months ago at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. And that project consists of 16 glass sculptures of these Black queer ancient Egyptian deities specifically.
Yeah, and why the ancient Egyptian? Where does that come from in the whole African cosmology?
No, that's a great question. Ancient Egypt is a very important historical nexus for thinking about the development of Black queer culture. So, for instance, you have a wide repertoire there of these queer deity figures. So, one figure in particular is called Hapi, who was thought of really as the androgynous personification of the Nile River. And in traditional iconography, he was depicted as a man, but with large breasts and a pregnant stomach. So one can think of him, particularly because we have images of him from at least 2000 BC, as the first androgynous deity in human history. So it's an important historical touchstone in that regard. And then also you have some of the earliest representation of same-sex couples. For example, these figures, Nyankanu and Knumatep, from 2500 BC, who built a stone tomb together where they were represented in the traditional stance of husband and wife. So you have this great iconography of queer relationships and queer deities. And for that reason, I think ancient Egypt is an important touchstone for recovering some of these traditions.
So Marcus, when I listen to this, you talk about androgynous, and you're talking about figures who have both traditional male and female, you know, shapes to their body, etc. What I also think about, though, is emotional intelligence. That androgyny, again, and I might be misinterpreting, would be bringing out, again, traditional male and female emotions or capacity to interact. Is that?
Oh, absolutely. And the figure that I mentioned before, Hoppy, really serves as this figure who unites all opposites, who represents a certain kind of human enlightenment, the final stage of human development. And even in some of the symbols that were attached to this figure, you can see those same ideas playing out. So in the headpiece that's associated with Hoppy, it has papyrus papyrus stems and lotus buds. So the papyrus on one hand, because this plant was used for writing and for books, represents a certain kind of left-brained logical approach to knowledge, whereas the lotus was a psychoactive plant that would take people on these psychedelic journeys. So even in the headpiece, you get this fusion of a left brain and right brain kind of knowledge, and is really about how do we fuse and unify all of the different disparate parts of human experience.
So if I can take Rainbow Serpent up to a purpose level, I guess what I'm hearing is you are helping people to better interact by by exposing them or by opening them up to different ways of feeling or communicating?
Absolutely. I mean, so as part of our mission, we do create a lot of artworks in various mediums from sculpture, film, photography, public installation. But we also do have a very strong outreach and educational component to our mission as well. And this really plays out, particularly in the retreats that we do. So, for instance, we host 3-day retreats at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, where we actually use these kinds of traditions and these figures to do a wide range of exercises from meditations, visualizations, dream work, with the idea of exposing people to other kinds of traditions that help us think about human potential in different ways.
Okay, and at these retreats, because again, you're talking about the LGBTQ community, Black LGBTQ community. I'm hearing things that any individual, a business individual, could be learning and benefiting for. So talk a little bit more about the retreats and the makeup of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, so there are a wide range of cultural traditions that usually make up the foundation for these kinds of retreats. I mean, of course, everyone is familiar with, let's say, a spiritual practice like yoga that comes from India, or
Mhm.
the chakras that comes from India, or from other kinds of modalities that we get. But when people think about the contributions of Africa and African spirituality, often people draw a blank, or they're not able to immediately put their finger on what those traditions might be or what they might offer. But I would contend that these spiritual traditions are really some of the fundamental traditions that guided human development over hundreds of thousands of years as our species was developing on the continent,
Mhm.
and that we really miss quite a bit when we don't really do the historical work to excavate those traditions or really turn to see what they have to offer. And again, all of the things that we do in the retreats, I mean, from ritual dance, thinking about modes of storytelling, thinking about body painting and the importance of color and material on the body as a way to activate spiritual insight. We really try to use these traditions to give people an enhanced self-awareness, spiritual connection, and even just practical skills. I mean, in things like how to build altars, how to connect with ancestors, that anyone can use to elevate their day-to-day life or their own spiritual practice.
Africa is made up of so many countries, and the differences between a Morocco and a Nigeria, or et cetera, are so different. But are there places where these traditions are strong, alive, and within African countries today?
Oh, that's a great question, and that's a complicated question. I mean, I would say one difficulty of that traditional spiritual traditions from the African context face is that they have to fight against a history of colonization that has attempted to marginalize and erase those histories. One has to contend with certain forms of monotheistic bias, which condemns anything that does not fall into the one God model as paganism or idolatry. One has to also contend with contemporary, modern, Western atheistic perspectives that would argue that concepts like spirit and consciousness are just an epiphenomenon of matter and materialism. So I would say there are many challenges that these traditions face. And as such, I think one of Rainbow Serpent's most powerful goals is to be a mouthpiece and an advocate for as many of these traditions as possible, which is why we work with a wide range of these traditions. So, for instance, we created a live performance called The Four World Ages, which draws on a particular Nigerian Igbo myth and cosmology. But we've also done photography projects that delve more into the Dogon tradition from Mali. So we're constantly working with excavating a wide variety of contexts from ancient Egypt and West Africa.
Okay, thank you. So let's sort of shift a little bit here. Your background's fascinating, and it says on your website your family opened the Miracles Fine Art Gallery, the first institution of its kind in Mason, Georgia. It specializes in exhibiting the work of Black artists. I went online. Um, I love art, as people around me know. It's a huge part of my life. The imagery is so powerful and the messaging so deep. So just tell me a little bit about how that happened, Miracles Fine Art Gallery, and yeah, a little bit about the art genre that you exhibit.
Perfect. That's a great question. So I am from Macon, Georgia, and my parents were born in the 1950s. So right at this cusp of the end of the Jim Crow era. And they really had an activist spirit and saw a need for the preservation of Black art and the advocacy for Black art, really as a way to build community, to build cultural pride, and to build knowledge. So they opened Miracles Fine Art Gallery in 1999. I'm sorry, in 1990. But even before they opened a physical gallery space, they built a collection of a wide range of artists from the Southeast, but also from the African continent. And they would travel this collection to community centers, to churches, to high schools, and they did a lot of work just trying to reach as many audiences as possible. And so I think the early exposure to art was pivotal for me. I mean, I grew up in an environment that was very rich with diverse expressions of Black creativity and innovation. And when it came to managing the gallery, all of us had to pitch in. I mean, my sister and I were at the gallery every day after school, every weekend. I mean, so really learning the nuts and bolts of the business and how to create these community-based institutions, I think was a very important influence even on the work I do now. Because Rainbow Serpent also, in addition to producing different kinds of artworks, we offer artist residencies as well. And so far, we've offered over 11 to a wide range of practitioners, artists, scholars, technologists who are based all over this country, but also Nigeria and England.
And how does this get started? I know you said your family did it and they took an interest and all that, but I speak to hundreds of what I will call ingenious thinkers, people that are doing something so different, like you and your family are, or your family did in establishing this. Why your mom and dad? What was the real trigger that said we need to do this?
Good question. I think, hmm, yeah, I think it was about thinking about cultural significance. I mean, thinking about how to provide a platform for voices and perspectives that are underrepresented. I think it was a strong understanding that they had about the importance of representation and the power of art to reflect and to shape community identity. And I think, again, those were the kinds of things that inspired me on this path where I could also try to contribute to and uplift Black artistic voices. I mean, and really kind of thinking about how to integrate art with cultural and social narratives.
It sounds like your parents provided you at least a space for freedom of thought about what you wanted to do and how you wanted to explore during your life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that upbringing, I think, really laid the foundation for everything. I mean, for my entire career. I mean, helping even just to guide my focus on the particular projects and initiatives that I would take, and thinking broadly about how to support and showcase Black artists, how to explore really complex cultural themes.
And now, how does technology or emerging technologies help to generate new artistic concepts and creations?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, I would say Rainbow Serpent's work is all about fusing the ancient with the modern. And so we're constantly thinking about how to use every medium we can as a venue to recover the splendor and complexity of these traditional African knowledge systems. So one of the projects we did was called The Four World Ages, which was a live performance meant to retell this particular Nigerian myth about the unfolding of human history from an early age of divine unity, where all human beings are directly connected to the Creator, to our contemporary age of chaos, where destruction and dissolution and pessimism reign supreme. So to do this, we created a particular spatial augmented reality system that used AI, motion capture, and computer vision to track the movement of four dancers in real time and project symbols onto their bodies that reflected the particular world age we were exploring. And I think this kind of technology really enhanced the storytelling experience by making the themes of the performance more tangible, more engaging. But it was also important for us because in looking at this tech space, particularly with spatial augmented reality, we discovered quite quickly that many of those systems had not been calibrated to work on people with darker skin tones. So we had a lot of work to do, even to shift and craft the tech so that we could make it responsive to Black bodies, but then more broadly to make it responsive to Black worldviews and cosmologies. So we're constantly thinking about how to not just be engaged with the past, but how to make it speak our contemporary language. We also did a project called Black Star Sanctuary, which is a virtual reality film that transports people into this meticulously crafted ancient Egyptian temple complex that houses megalithic 3D versions of the deities that were covered in the Myth Science project. And we kind of showed for about 16 minutes how the space was organized and arranged, really just to demonstrate how virtual reality can be employed to provide these deep, immersive experiences that can enhance a viewer's understanding and engagement with different kinds of historical and cultural contexts in an interactive manner.
That is quite a bringing together of so many concepts through technology, and I love that you're embracing human movement and human emotion of expression with the artistic and through technology. I look forward to learning and seeing more about that.
Well, yeah, no, I guess just to kind of follow up on that, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that because even dance itself was thought of as dance movement was thought of as a mode of knowledge. I mean, being able to hold the body in certain positions really captured certain senses of history, certain senses of energy flow. I mean, so many things were wrapped into the physicality of how the body can be positioned. And so dance is actually something that we've done and explored quite a bit in many of our projects. I'm also thinking about the first film project that we did, which is called Obiumbu, which kind of takes on a different Igbo Nigerian myth about the creation of the world through these two androgynous deities who come together and dance the world into existence. And for that, we experimented with some novel ultraviolet lighting techniques where we painted the dancers' bodies with a fluorescent paint and used ultraviolet light. The whole film was actually kind of shot with ultraviolet light to create certain kinds of ethereal visual effects that could really emphasize some of the more supernatural aspects of the narrative. And thinking about light and the construction of light and how new kinds of camera capture light in different ways. We use that to add a layer of depth and mysticism to the work and transform the performance space into an environment that could really resonate with those themes of creation.
Marques, this has been fascinating, and it's probably the fastest near 30 minutes I've ever had with somebody. So I really look forward to catching up as we go forward. So Marques Redd, Rainbow Servant. I do have one more question, one more area that I'd love to ask about. and it builds on art and what you were just discussing. You've been bringing Rainbow Serpent's been bringing uh, art installations to the public across the U.S. Tell us about that.
Oh goodness, yes, we've done a variety of projects that um, attempt to present images and new narratives and disseminate them in the widest way possible. So I'm even thinking about the Four World Ages project. I mean, so that also, in addition to being a live performance, was a photography series. And we took images from this multimedia project and displayed them on digital kiosks and billboards across cities like Baltimore and Pittsburgh. I mean, we had also a 1,600 square foot video installation of part of the performance displayed on a building in downtown Atlanta. And so, yeah, so the installations bring these mythological narratives into the public eye and really transform everyday spaces into gateways for new types of cultural storytelling. We did a project here in Pittsburgh called Playing the Cosmic Strings in collaboration with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, which was, again, a large scale billboard installation that took this narrative about a cosmic spider and the cosmic strings that the spider weaves, which are a metaphor, these vibrating strings, for all of these energy patterns that connect everything and form the structure of the world. And so we're thinking about music from a traditional African perspective as all of these sonic harmonies that emanate from these infinite strings everywhere in creation. And of course, that was a perfect image for the symphony, of course, and the strings that they use to create music. Um, let's see, Anatomy of the Human is another project that we've done, a photography series by my collaborator, Michaela Wuna, which explores the multiple spirit bodies that make up the human soul. And images from that series were displayed on at least about 200 digital kiosks around the country. So, yeah, so it's just another venue for helping us to encourage interaction with these kinds of ideas and perspectives. It helps us to think about raising awareness because of our work is tackling themes around race, blackness, queerness, new historical narratives. So, I mean, it's a way to educate the public and raise awareness, and also really providing a tool for communities to express their identity and their issues and their aspirations with the hope of sowing the seeds for positive social change.
Marcus, my favorite state of being is learning. I have learned and opened my eyes to so many things, both researching for today, and certainly listening to you. It's been an unbelievable 30 minutes. So, Marques Redd, Rainbow Serpent, thank you so much again for joining Say Hi to the Future, and we look forward to having you on in the future to talk more about what you've been doing.
Thank you so much. I definitely appreciate this opportunity.